a very warm welcome for everyone, and please apologize. Please accept my apologies for the technical hiccups before starting this session. We have a very large volume of participants today, which we're very excited about. So let's see if MS Teams can take this amount of participants. We're very excited to welcome you to the official launch of the Disaster Displacement Addendum to the City Resilience Scorecard. This is the first of two sessions we're having today. Please note that this session is originally conducted in English, but at the same time we have interpretation in French and in Arabic. So please choose the channel that is convenient for you. Another item of housekeeping is that the session is going to be recorded, and the recording is going to be made available to all of you. As participants, because we have such a large volume, you will not be able to unmute, but we do encourage your active participation in the chat or in the QA box. So please feel free to write any questions that you have throughout the session in the Q&A, and we will have segments throughout the webinar where we will be picking up these questions and discuss them. So again, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us. My name is Carla Lienhardt. I'm the Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation Program Support Officer at IOM. And I'm going to be your moderator for today's session to launch the Disaster Displacement Addendum to the City Resilience Scorecard. I'm very happy to have such a diverse audience. It's really great to see that we have representatives from local governments with us, international organizations, civil society, a lot of academia, and practitioners that are working on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And I'm also delighted to be accompanied by my colleagues, of course, that are part of the Displacement Scorecard team, and that will be speaking at this webinar. So first of all, we will start the session with introductory remarks from Loretta Heber-Girard, Chief of UNDRR's Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Development Branch. So we're going to share a recorded message from her, which is then followed by Atle Solberg, the head of the Platform for Disaster Displacement, who will also provide some live remarks. And then we will have a presentation by my colleague Daria Mognachova from UNDRR, who will give you an overview of the scorecard and the facilitation package and how it works. And later in the session, we will have my colleague Lorenzo Guadagno from the PDD, who will go through the lessons learned so far from the different pilots that we've had to implement the scorecard. And we're also very, very honored to have with us today Najib. So Najib Abdi is from the Kenya's Council of Governors and is joining us today to share his experiences from the Kenyan counties that have used the scorecard already. So we're looking forward to a very engaging discussion with you. And without further ado, I think we can start with the introductory remarks. So I'm going to first share the recorded message from UNDRR. Thank you, everyone.
Dear colleagues and participants, I would like to extend to you a very warm welcome. It is my pleasure to be here on behalf of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction to introduce this very important new joint tool together with our close partners, the IOM, PDD, and IDMC. Displacement is one of the most common and immediate impacts of disasters, which pose serious humanitarian and development concerns. Climate change is further projected to increase disaster displacement globally through more frequent and intense extreme events, as well as slow onset processes globally, such as sea level rise and desertification. Combined with other challenges, such as rapid and unplanned urbanization, population growth, poverty, conflict, weak governance, all these factors contribute to increasing disaster risk overall and undermining sustainable development efforts and gains. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction recognizes disaster displacement as an important concern and calls for urgent measures to address it. Preventing, reducing, and addressing disaster displacement should be at the heart of UNDRR and DRR policies and planning processes to reduce future disaster risk and ensure more resilient societies. Yet at present, displacement is insufficiently considered by governments as part of their DRR efforts, particularly at the local level. The tool we are introducing today is one of the latest additions to the Disaster Resilience Scorecard for Cities series, which is a set of tools that UNDRR and its partners have developed under the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. These tools aim to help local governments assess disaster resilience and support local DRR planning in line with the Sendai Framework. The Disaster Displacement Addendum to the Scorecard is a self-assessment tool for local governments that supports the integration of disaster displacement considerations into local DRR policies and planning processes. The tool was developed as part of a collaborative, multi-partner effort in consultation with global experts and stakeholders and pilot tested in several countries. I would like to thank all the partners who have supported this process, in particular, the Norwegian Refugee Council, the International Organization for Migration, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, UNDRR regional offices, and all the experts who contributed to the stakeholder consultation and pilot workshops. I would also like to thank the donors who supported the development of this tool, including the German Federal Foreign Office, the IOM Migration Resource Allocation Committee, and the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. We hope that the new Disaster Displacement Addendum to the Scorecard will help to bridge some of the existing gaps in disaster displacement and DRR policy planning and implementation, and contribute to more inclusive and resilient communities. I wish you all an excellent session. Thank you.
Thank you, UNDRR, for preparing this message. I would now like to invite Atle Solberg from the PDD to give his remarks. Atle, please, over to you.
Thank you, Carla. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm very excited to see so many people joining us. I see 242 joining us in this launch. So my name is Atle Solberg. I'm head of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, the PDD. I'm joining you from Geneva, Switzerland. The PDD is a state-led initiative. It's currently under the leadership of Kenya and Costa Rica. We have 19 member states and also a large advisory committee, many of those being partner to this event today. The objective of the Platform on Disaster Displacement is to strengthen the protection of people that are displaced in the context of disasters and adverse of climate change, but also to prevent and reduce the risk of disaster displacement. So very honored to say a few welcoming remarks in this launch webinar to the Disaster Displacement Addendum to the City Resilience Scorecard. And the relevance of this tool cannot be under-communicated. Disaster displacement is one of the most common impact of disasters. The Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, IDMC, estimates that around 25 million people are displaced every year due to sudden onset hazards related to cyclones, storms, and flooding. And most likely there are more people displaced in the context of more slow onset events such as droughts. The importance of local governance and the importance of local authorities when it comes to responding to and preparing for displacement cannot be under-communicated either, and also highlighting the relevance of these tools. Local authorities are at the front lines of reducing risk and responding to disasters. This includes working to reduce the risk related with displacement, being prepared for potential displacement, and building capacity to respond to and address disaster displacement. Building the capacities to respond and prepare is of particular importance to cities. Cities are the places where more people are concentrated, more people will live in the future, and therefore more displacement can take place. And it's also the place where many displaced end up. Cities often are suffering the biggest impact of displacement and bear the largest share of responsibility to respond and recover from displacement. So arguably, we cannot effectively promote local resilience if we do not effectively integrate displacement concept into all strategies, plans, and responses at the subnational, at the local level. We are very pleased to have partnered with so many to develop this tool. This is a tool, the addendum is a tool to convene different actors from all sectors and stakeholders groups to discuss what should be done, where to start from, and what can we do and who can do what when it comes to responding and preparing for disaster displacement. The tool allows us to discuss needs, capacities, initiatives, and gaps to address displacement in the context of disasters, and frame these discussions in the context of broader disaster risk and disaster risk management planning. This tool is also relevant for global discussions and global commitment. It is clearly, the addendum is a tool for local authorities, but the tool also supports work that allows to advance towards global objectives spelled out in the Senda Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, and all the work under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in particular related to loss and damage, and the 2 global compacts on migration and for refugees. So in one way, the addendum is a tool that supports local authorities to lead on global implementation of commitments and objectives under this global policy framework. I want to end with thanking all the partners that have enabled the process to develop this tool: the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, International Organization for Migration, IOM, Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, IDMC, Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC, International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, IFRC, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, Global Network of Disaster Reduction, and local partners in countries. I'm in particular honored to be sharing this panel with Najib from the Council of Governors. I'm looking very much forward to see Najib again and also to hear from his intervention. With this, I wish you all good luck. Again, very excited. Since I start speaking, another 30 people have joined us. So we have 270 people listening. And I think that's amazing. And it shows the relevance and the interest of this tool. So congratulations and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Atle, for these opening remarks and to really set the stage for the rest of the webinar. Yeah, I can only echo you. I'm also very excited to see such high interest from the audience. And without further ado, let's dive into it. For the next segment, I would like to hand over now to Daria Mognachova from UNDRR that will give us a presentation and overview of how the scorecard looks like, how it works, and how to facilitate and implement it in a country context. So with that, please, over to you, Daria.
Thank you very much, Carla. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, dear participants. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I hope you can hear me well. So welcome to this session. And I'm very glad to represent UNDRR here to introduce this tool that we developed together with so many partners. The addendum is available online. You can access it using this QR code. And also, I would like to note that all the materials that we're discussing today will be also available online after the webinar. So please keep an eye on the links that are being posted in the chat, where you can find all the relevant information. Some of you might be familiar with the Disaster Resilience Scorecard for cities, which was launched as part of the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. So this disaster displacement is one of the thematic addenda to that original tool. And as a self-assessment tool, the Scorecard Addendum is here to support governments to identify gaps and also to help design and formulate and also implement policies to include displacement concerns into disaster risk reduction efforts. So ideally, the disaster displacement addendum should be used in a complementary way to the main disaster resilience scorecard for cities. The aim of this addendum is to empower local governments, and by this we mean cities, municipalities, or any other subnational level of government, to better plan for displacement crisis and to enhance community resilience by integrating disaster displacement into local DRR planning. All of this can help to prevent displacement, and in cases where displacement cannot be prevented, it can help to prepare for displacement, ensuring that it happens in a dignified manner. It can also help to limit how long people are displaced and the extent of the challenges that they face. And of course, it can contribute to overall strengthening the resilience of displaced persons, those at risk of displacement, as well as host communities. By addressing all of these aspects, the Scorecard Addendum supports efforts to achieve the goals of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, especially around targets B and E, around affected people numbers and strengthening DR strategies. And it also helps to ensure the protection of rights and the safety and security of those who are at risk of disaster displacement or who are already living in displacement. So why is this important? Because we cannot reduce disaster risk if we do not also reduce the risks related to disaster displacement. So from the point of view of disaster risk reduction, displacement can exacerbate vulnerabilities and reduce the resilience of individuals and communities. It can also increase future disaster risk and undermine recovery and build back better efforts. And conversely, DRR measures can prevent displacement, reduce its impacts, and facilitate durable solutions, and also swifter and more sustainable recovery and resolution of displacement. So both of these elements should really go hand in hand, and displacement needs to be addressed across all of the phases of the disaster risk management cycle. So, for example, what you see here on the slide, this starts from prevention, of course, through disaster risk reduction actions, which are aimed at preventing conditions that can lead to displacement, to preparedness, for example, through early warning systems and early action, so that any displacement, such as evacuations, can take in an orderly and dignified manner, and provide assistance to those who are unable to move by themselves. It also includes planning for response. So, for example, providing basic needs to displaced persons during an emergency, and also planning for recovery. So in the case of displacement, this means achieving durable solutions for the displaced, whether it's returning home, settling where they are, or relocating to a safer place, all while ensuring the protection of their rights and their safety and dignity, and preventing the creation of new risks. So all of these elements are what the Scorecard Addendum on disaster displacement looks into, with the aim to strengthen the integration of displacement and DRR policy and planning at local level. The scorecard addendum itself is a very practical and hands-on tool that local governments can use by themselves or with the help of other stakeholders, ideally through a consultative process and dialogue involving multiple stakeholders. And for those of you who are familiar with the original disaster resilience scorecard for cities, the approach is very similar. So like all other scorecards, the disaster displacement addendum is structured along the 10 essentials for making cities resilient, which is a checklist which breaks down the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction into very concrete 10 key areas or principles of DRR implementation at the local level. So this addendum has 24 questions, each with 4 answer options, scored from 0 to 3, 3 being the maximum score. The questions and indicators are in line with the Sendai framework, as well as existing international law principles and guidance on displacement and human rights. For each of the 10 essentials for making cities resilient, we have a number of questions or indicators for local governments to answer to help assess whether they have the relevant policies, institutional arrangements, and practices in place to address disaster displacement as part of DRR efforts. So those of you familiar with the original scorecard may notice that the 10 essentials have been adjusted slightly to tailor them to disaster displacement and risks that are associated with it, but they still cover the same essential areas across governance, integrated planning, and preparedness. The questions included in the scorecard look into such areas as availability of policies and coordination mechanisms to prevent and manage disaster displacement, data collection capacity and use for decision-making, financial capacities, land use planning for evacuation and long-term solutions, sustainable environmental management, as well as institutional and societal capacities to prepare for disaster displacement, infrastructure use, and response and recovery, such as durable solutions. So, for example, looking in more detail into Essential 1, which focuses on organizing to address disaster displacement, or governance in other words, we have 3 questions or 3 indicators to help governments assess the adequacy of their governance mechanisms to manage disaster displacement as part of DRR. So one question here is about whether DRR and disaster risk management policy frameworks adequately address disaster displacement concerns. The second indicator is whether there is institutional collaboration on disaster displacement across sectors. The third indicator looks into whether there are clearly assigned mandates, roles, and responsibilities across all of the departments working on disaster displacement. So that's just one example of how each essential is broken down into a number of questions or indicators that help to explore different aspects of governance related to disaster displacement. And to give you an example of a specific question, let's look into the first one under Essential 1, which focuses on whether disaster displacement is integrated across relevant local disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management policies. So as you see, each question has 4 answer options scored from 0 to 3. So for example, a city or municipality with no city plan in place and no reference to disaster displacement will score 0. A city or subnational government that has a comprehensive plan in place addressing all stages of disaster displacement across the whole disaster management cycle will score 3. A local government whose local plans partially address disaster displacement would score 1 or 2, depending on the specific situation of the locality. So in some cases, the answer might not be straightforward, and it might fall somewhere in between these options. So in those cases, the scoring would need to be decided by consensus through discussion between the different stakeholders based on available information and local priorities. The disaster displacement addendum to the scorecard comes in different formats, which are all available online, again, on our website. Please check the links. They're free to download and to use. So first of all, there's the PDF document, which provides more detailed information about the questions and each essential. And there's also an Excel tool, which allows to easily record the answers as well as possible actions to address identified gaps and assign responsibilities and roles. The Excel tool also allows to automatically visualize the results of the scoring, and this is what you see here on the screen. So this is the result of an exercise that was conducted. And it allows you to also generate reports that can form the basis for an action plan, and that can be shared with donors, for example, or partners for further planning and implementation. And there's also a very handy facilitation guide that can help workshop facilitators to prepare and conduct workshops to help local governments apply the Scorecard Addendum and develop a basic action plan. So all of these tools can be used by any local government, institution, stakeholder wishing to support the assessment of local resilience and capacity to integrate disaster displacement into disaster risk reduction action. And what happens next after the scorecard has been applied? So this really depends on each locality. It has to be a locally driven process. Here we have just a few examples of follow-up priority actions that governments may decide to put in place after identifying gaps using the scorecard. And which ones to prioritize will really depend on each specific context. So in the facilitation resources, there are some pointers to help governments with the prioritization and planning process based on the results of the scorecard application. There are various tools that are available for governments in their decision-making process, such as this very simple 2x2 matrix that helps to determine the impact and cost of actions. And ultimately, the objective of the scorecard is for each government to come out of this exercise with its own action plan and a set of measures that they would like to prioritize based on available needs and resources. And to conclude, this new tool can serve as a very useful practical resource for governments wishing to better integrate disaster displacement into DRR efforts and planning. So we will hear later some concrete examples of the application of the tool. This scoring system is a way to help identify gaps. So please note that this is not meant to compare cities because each city or locality will have its own very specific needs and context. And it also helps to measure a local government's own progress over time. So remember that resilience building is a long-term process that requires continuous learning and readjustment. So this tool can be used regularly over time to help governments continuously improve their policies and practices. With this, I conclude my presentation, and we can take a few minutes for very quick questions about the tool specifically, if there are any. And I would like to ask Marta to please help me with this part.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Marta Lindström from the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. I am moderating the QA session. We haven't yet had any questions in the QA box, so please let's take a half a minute to post questions in the QA box, and we will be able to post them to Dasha.
If there are no questions at this stage, we also have another Q&A session a bit later in a few minutes. So we can take these questions a bit later. And since we've had a few glitches at the beginning, perhaps we can already move on to the next part.
Yes, I agree. Thank you both. Thank you, Marta. We will come back to you when we have the Q&A session. And thank you so much, Daria, for this great presentation. It's really, I hope everyone will check out the links to see where you can find and download the tools, as they're all accessible. And now moving on from the theory to practice, I would like to first quickly hand the floor to Lorenzo before we then would also like to hear from the Kenya experience and Najib, of course. But first, maybe Lorenzo, you can give us a quick overview of how the tool development or evolution looked like and how it has been implemented so far. Over to you, Lorenzo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carla and colleagues, and thanks to everyone who's joined the session. I will share my screen then, and I would just ask you to confirm that you can see the presentation. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Then I will very quickly just lead you through the development of this tool and perhaps give you also a few indications on where the tool has already been used. The first version of this tool was developed by the Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC, in collaboration with UNDRR and a group of actors. And we, the Platform on Disaster Displacement, together with IOM, we had the privilege to collaborate with the Council of Governors in Kenya to test it out. We used it in a few counties in Kenya, so working with local governments to try to understand what areas were well covered, what needed some improvements. We came out of 3 pilots in particular in Mombasa, Kisumu, and Homa Bay, with a list basically of improvements that needed to be implemented in the tool. In parallel, other actors used it in Iraq, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Brazil, and in Guatemala. And then starting beginning of last year, roughly, we had a set of consultations with experts from different organizations to try to integrate all this feedback from local authorities from the actual implementation of the tool in a revised version. The revised version was ready roughly in summer last year, so in 2024, and it was tested and finalized again in Kenya, this time in the county of Garissa. Basically, ever since autumn this year, we have been able to have this finalized version that UNDRR and IOM have been able to put online. It's freely available for consultation, for use by different actors working at local level. And in addition to that, it's been also presented to the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in a dedicated session for local actors. The latest use of these, based on again this finalized version that's available and that has been just shared with you in the chat, have been a series of trainings in the Caribbean. So you have a list of the countries on screen, as well as a training of trainers that's happened in Kenya at national level in collaboration with IOM. So we are at the stage where the tool is finalized and it includes all these elements that Dasha was presenting before. But on top of that, we are starting to actually roll it out through a series of training of trainers, as well as assessments that actually support this prioritization exercise that was described by the previous speaker. So in order to tell us a little bit more about the experience using this tool, I will now hand it over to Najib Abdi, who is working at the Council of Governors in Kenya, which is a national level institution, but it deals with local authorities, in particular with devolved powers that in the Constitution of Kenya are actually devolved at the county level. So in disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management are actually part of these responsibilities that Kenya hands over to the local level. So Najib, if you're online, you have the floor now. I will stop sharing the screen and you can take it on over.
Thank you, Lorenzo, and the team. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes,
yes,
we can
you
hear
are.
Yeah, thank you. It is actually very satisfying to see this has been shared across the world, and we didn't know that this was where we are going to reach when we started this journey with you, the PD team and the other actors. I think for us is I think this tool has been very in a way we tried to implement in those 4 counties, which in Kenya's context 2 share geographical or ecological zones and mostly face similar hazards, but 2 also are different, more arid and drought related issue, another one is more coastal. And I think for us, if I just stick with the issue of the experience, I think most has been said by the previous speakers. For us, it was the approach we used was very, very, I think, strategic, because we didn't just delve into going to the county itself or to the local authority. We had to do some bit of groundwork in a way that we needed to identify who are our stakeholders, because the sector itself, disaster as a whole itself, again, it affects our various sectors. So as the tool has also indicated, it touches on many things. So for us, it was very, we took our time in terms of identifying those actors, and instead of going directly to the technical actors on the ground, that's the level of directors at the department level, on the local authorities, we had to start the policy level, because the idea was that we knew something will come out from this tool itself, and action-oriented priorities will come from it, and we had initial to get the buy-in of the leadership. And I think this has been the case of the 4 counties, and I think the method we used ultimately paid off, because we had the attention of the leadership, because we involved them at the high level, and subsequently we had to be explicit with the kind of stakeholders we wanted. Sometimes you find counties or local authorities, the fragmented effort in terms of displacement. You have the actors, non-state actors doing their own stuff, and then you have the government itself doing something else. But when we brought them together, I think it was in a way kickstarted an initiative where platform they have continuously used. Since we started this journey, I think we have faced several 2 occasions floods, and I can attest those counties, the platform that has emerged from undertaking this work has continuously, being used. For me, as a Kenyan, I think it was key to see something that people were taking for granted, because to us it was not more of implementing this tool. It was ideally redefining the way displacement is perceived and addressed at the local level. We had a case in Mombasa. I don't know if you remember, Lorenzo. We had a case in Mombasa where people are assuming when displacement happened, we all assume someone is in a tent, in a shelter area, but cultural context differs. So like place in Mombasa, we had people being hosted by family members, the strong family bond there, but this was never perceived as a displaced person or a burden to the host. But these are the things that came out, and I think in a way it was not planned before, but now it's something that has been planned for, and I think the county has taken that into context. And so those kind of overlooked, areas is what the tool has helped us. So the tool initially, as has been explained by Daria, is a self-assessment. Yes. So for us as a counties, it was very instrumental. Those 4 counties has been very instrumental. It has been like a report card where you have written your priorities and your gaps. And then again, when any intervention is coming from national government or actor is coming to your county, they can use as a reference to support you, to support particular initiative you want. Case in point, one of the counties currently is developing with another UN agencies and strengthening urban data on the issue of displacement and resilience. And this has come actually initiative that straight came from the tool itself. So like if I particularly use Mombasa again, Mombasa County ideally came to realize this, we have this beautiful document policies. But of course, we have now the ears of the leadership. It's a chance for us to do corrective measures. So they went ahead and again corrected that. They have reviewed their local laws and to mainstream issue of displacement. As we speak this today, Mombasa County is thinking how to establish a dedicated disaster management authority. And this is something that's being kickstarted by implementation of this tool so far. So it's not just about collecting this information and saying you have this or that, but it shows the local government when empowered with the right tools and leadership, it can drive significant policy reforms. So these counties, as we speak today, the transition from reactive crisis management to proactive one, because you will always do reactive if you have not corrected issue of the policy you have, the legal framework you have, because this is where you again try to do budget allocation for. There has been a significant budget increase in Garissa County. Case in point for this, it is a beneficiary of a certain program, but they have deliberately prioritized issue of displacement and permanent shelters for Garissa. So that is something in the open they are doing. So ideally, if I just can give one thing to the teams who are going to use this, it will always be good for you if I come to support you as a donor or as even your policy maker. If you can give me an evidence-based, documented, gaps and priorities, and you can tell me this is what you are lacking. And again, you realize sometimes it opens the doors for you without even looking outside. Within your budget, the different departments have different roles, different budgets that are hidden. And you might say, I don't have budget for displacement, but when you come together and do the assessment, this will open the door for you. Again, you find in the context of Kenya, we have so many civil societies and international NGOs working on the ground. Everyone is doing something. But through this tool, it has made them have to have that same platform and do complementary efforts in addressing displacement rather than duplicating and wasting the resources. If there's any other question, I think I can answer later, but I can stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Najib. Thanks a lot. And thanks indeed for all the collaboration throughout the process and all the help, especially supporting those engagements at different level, at technical, at policy level. I think you touched upon a number of points that were also my impression coming out of this process with Kenya, and that I will try to summarize now in some of the lessons learned and perhaps also the next steps that we can take. I am sharing again the presentation. Just a quick note if you can see it. All good?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Then just very quickly, building on what Najib was just presenting. I think you highlighted, Najib, how this tool allowed to bring people together and start a conversation, raise awareness around disaster displacement, disasters, and its relevance for disaster risk reduction planning. I think this is indeed the first outcome of using this tool. You're going to bring together in the same room a wide variety of people that work in different sectors, from education to shelter to urban planning, housing policies, health, transportation. And all these people might not necessarily be aware of the implications that displacement has for their work and how they need to plan in order to integrate these considerations around displacement in case there is a disaster, basically. So you're going to have a number of people that are going to be convened. They are going to be starting to talk together to discuss what is ongoing, what are the main issues locally, who can do what, and then they are going to be participating in an exercise of prioritization of action. So at the end of the workshop, there is this moment where people come together, take everything that's been said, and really try to understand what's more relevant for the city, for the local government, and these as some benefits again that Najib was already highlighting. There is a shared understanding of the issue. There is a shared understanding of what are the main priorities, and there is this evidence that is generated that can help set up a good platform for follow-up work, whether it is for fundraising, whether it is for implementation, including identifying measures that do not necessarily cost a lot of money, but require different ways of organizing local work. So awareness raising, definitely, coordination, and this prioritization are three of the main benefits of running this tool. As Najib was also saying, again, we really need to make sure that whenever we use this tool, we are convening different actors. Displacement is relevant to the work of pretty much all sectors of a local government, and not all of these sectors will have been involved in relevant discussions before. Not only this is relevant for the different parts at the technical level of the government, but you really need to make sure that it's also relevant to the highest possible level of the local government, because without a clear commitment towards this process, this is not going necessarily to have the same outcomes within the workshop, and definitely it is not going to be leading to the same outcomes in terms of a process to build local capacities. One other thing that we noted was that the outcomes of the assessments were much better when we could have either the participation of displaced persons themselves in this workshop, or of organizations that are closely working with displaced persons and their representatives. And that really allows to add a level of ground truthing, of honesty, even of challenging perceptions locally of people that are working on this topic from the government side, but in a healthy way, so that we can actually understand where are some of the limitations perhaps that the government is not necessarily aware of, but that can be brought to the attention for follow-up. And lastly, one other thing that we noted was that there were sometimes issues around terminology, and so we, as part of this process of using the scorecard, one of the benefits is really to clarify the issue also from the conceptual and theoretical term. Again, in terms of very quick lessons learned, I will stress again, this has already been said, but local ownership is key. Without the Council of Governors, without the engagement that Najib and his colleagues were able to leverage within the counties, this process wouldn't have been as effective in Kenya. We would have just gone in as an international actor, perhaps liaising with a few local counterparts, but we wouldn't have been able to have this local ownership and engagement. And this first step that Najib was describing, reaching out to high-level officials within the government, having a local lead, making sure that policy and technical level within the local government are involved, this is really important. We can use this tool as a follow-up to ongoing assessments that use the broader city resilience scorecard that kind of assesses capacities on disaster risk reduction more broadly. But this tool can also be used as a standalone tool. So you can, in Kenya, there was a mix of counties that had already used the city resilience scorecard or that used this tool for the first time, and both work. Clearly, if you are, however, assessing capacities around displacement in the context of a broader commitment to building capacities on disaster risk reduction, that's probably a little bit easier in terms of starting the process, and it's also perhaps more sustainable if there are capacities and engagements that are already leveraged and committed to the process from the local government. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, this cannot remain a tool that is used in isolation, right? We need to have also a process to follow up on the priorities that are identified locally. That can be in terms of fundraising, in terms of engagement of technical partners that can support with the implementation of the actual responses and actions that are identified, or it can be with immediate follow-up, something that's happening in Kenya now as well, in addition to the efforts that Najib was mentioning, is that the International Organization for Migration is stepping in after these assessments and is supporting capacities for evacuations and preparedness in different counties where the assessment has taken place, so that some of the measures that have been identified in this prioritization exercise can actually be implemented right away, and we can build upon this engagement and awareness with actual response measures. So I think, again, making sure that this tool is used to start a process and not just as a self-contained assessment that then produces a document that is never actually used. I think that would be perhaps the most important element. In terms now of what we can do together, you will see in the last slide that there are contact information that you can use to reach out to us, perhaps for more information or even to think around how we can organize such a process in your countries or locations, cities, whatever the case might be. But just flagging that we can set up also more dedicated bilateral exchanges around this. There are IOM offices, IDMC, UNDRR and PDD that can also lead demonstrations around this tool. So there are ways to give you a more concrete flavor of this tool and how it works. And as I said before, we have been organizing both assessments and training of trainers around this. And if there are ways to support processes in different countries with these tools, we are clearly available for that. If there is an ongoing assessment using the broader Scorecard tool in your county or in your city, then perhaps also keep in mind that this is a tool that can be used to strengthen the process. And on the other side, if you are starting a process for disaster risk reduction planning, for identifying priorities for the future, keep in mind that this is a tool that can help support such a process. So if there are processes ongoing like that in the place you're working, then keep in mind that this is a tool that can be particularly useful. I will stop here at this stage, and I will give back the floor to Carla and Marta for running the rest of the session. Over.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. I think, yeah, it's really exciting to think about what could be potential next steps and to engage with whoever of you is interested after this session to explore the scorecard further. We're now reaching the Q&A segment of this session, and I saw that there are already quite some questions in the Q&A, but I think some people may have also posted their questions in the chat, so we may need some support to pick up those. I would like to just touch upon two that I saw from the Q&A before I hand over to Marta to help me with that part. Because I think there was a kind of technical question around how to use the tools and their forms that are available. So there's, of course, the Microsoft Excel version of the tool, which is nice because it's interactive. You can use it to score the questions, and then at the end you receive the automated visualizations. But you may have issues enabling the macros. We can also double check from our side if there's any issue with the current Excel. But in case for your organization's security settings, you may not be able to use this. We do have other forms of the tool available. It's available as an accessible PDF. We even have a simplified version as a Google Forms. So there are many ways you can use the tool to also be able to translate it into your local language, for example. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other one was a question from the Q&A that the presentation seems to be more related to cities and wondering how rural areas and hard to reach locations will benefit from the scorecard. And I think it may be misleading because in the beginning we're talking about the city resilience scorecard, right? But I would just like to highlight that, of course, it does not only apply to cities, but to any type of local government. As we were seeing in the case of Kenya, it was at the county level, or even it can be at a district or neighborhood, rural area level. So it's very flexible. It's targeting really the local level in whichever form is useful in the specific context. And what's important is that local authorities, so it doesn't have to be a mayor of a city, it can be any type of local authority is involved in this process. And with this, over to you, Marta, or if any of the other colleagues would like to also comment on that question. Over to you.
Thank you, Carla. I don't think there is anyone else coming in to complement that response, but we do have some very interesting questions in the chat, including one for Lorenzo or for yourself from Eva Katinuaga, who wonders, whom do you target as key informants when asking these questions, and what is the sample size to have a conclusive representation in the implementation of the scorecard? I thought we could start with that one, and then there are some other questions.
Yeah, if that's okay, I'll go quickly around that. On average, I think the type of events that we organized included some 30 people, or 35, up to 40, 45. And we really try to have as much as possible a representation from the different sectors of the local government that are relevant to addressing displacement. So from clearly the disaster risk management side into the more service provision, education, health, transportation, housing, etc., but also involving representatives of civil society organizations working with displaced persons and in some cases representatives of displaced communities. So those are our key informants, people that actually work on either the planning side and the response to disasters, on disaster risk reduction broadly and on displacement in particular, or people that work on displacement and then can contribute to disaster risk reduction efforts. And I would say in order to get that balance, again, at the very least, you probably need, I would say 20, 25 people, and more it's good to have. It becomes a little bit complicated sometimes with the organization of webinars or sorry, of actual assessment in persons, but it's probably useful in terms of getting a little bit more feedback on the different dimensions of this. Over.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for that clarifying response. We do have another question specifically on how the tools identify and prioritize vulnerable populations at risk of displacement from Alpha Bailada Dengue. So that's a question on how it identifies people at risk rather than people who have already been displaced.
Should I also take it?
You're welcome to.
Yeah. So this is based on our experience in these assessments that we've done, especially in Kenya. It's based on two main elements. First of all, many local authorities already have access to disaster risk data, and they can understand where disasters might happen in their area. And what people are actually exposed to these disasters, right? So how many people, but also what is the demographic composition? What are what is the potential for people to be affected and be displaced? This is clearly not necessarily, in most cases, a very precise estimation, but there are good risk models that tell us who is at risk. And there are increasingly organizations that are working to develop displacement risk models specifically. So in some cases, these displacement risk models, if they are available, can also be used to base that decision. The other element that helps, it's just past knowledge of disasters locally, right? Even if there is no quantitative assessments of potential risk, of potential number of people that are exposed and that might be displaced, there is experience from past floods, from past storms, from past earthquakes, whatever might be the case locally. And there is a knowledge of patterns of displacement in previous disasters. And I think in case there is no quantitative assessment that's kind of predictive of potential displacement, then that knowledge of past events is at least a good basis to start these discussions. Especially in the case of hazards and disasters that tend to be repeated either annually or seasonally or whatever might be the case. But over, does that, hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I think that was a very enlightening response. We have another question more linked to Dasha's presentation from Krishna Kalikosh, who wonders if we can please guide if cities will be able to assign weights or prioritize questions in the scorecard depending on the local needs. Perhaps, Dasha, you'd like to come in on this?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. It's a very good one, and I saw it in the chat as well. So we have a couple of optional questions in the scorecard itself. In practice, and this is a very new tool, so it still has to be piloted and used in different localities to see whether some indicators might need to be adapted, tailored a little bit to the local context. But I can tell you from the experience of using the main disaster resilience scorecard for cities, where we have actually very much encouraged local governments and national governments to adapt the tool to their needs. So this is more of a guidance tool to help you with a methodology and with some indication on relevant principles, available guidance on how to manage disaster displacement and disaster risk reduction. If some of the indicators are not exactly relevant to your context, it is possible to either skip them or adapt them a little bit to your context. This is really a tool that we made for local governments to, make it as useful as possible for your specific needs. And sometimes, indeed, some of the questions might be a bit general, and you might wish to add some additional information, or not address a question in case it's not really relevant to your context. And with that, Marta, if I can actually take, there was another question which focused more on whether the scorecard captures interventions related to children and young adults. So on this one, I wanted to say we do have a couple of indicators that focus on youth integration as part of Essential 7, which focuses on engaging communities and building societal capacity. So this is where this is a little bit covered. And there's also some guidance throughout the tool if you open the PDF version, which also provides some principles on how to best integrate children in disaster displacement management interventions. But again, if there is an interest from your side to explore these specific aspects in more detail, nothing prevents you from discussing this as part of the consultative workshop, as part of this, the application of this tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dasha, for those responses. Another question that we had in the chat from Alpha Bailadenke is how community leaders like chiefs can be involved in disaster preparedness planning and in the implementation of the scorecard. Perhaps this is something that Lorenzo or Najib could elaborate on based on the experiences from Kenya.
I can go, I think, Lorenzo. So in the context of Kenya, local authorities or county government has administrative units. So the counties needed or felt that there's a need to have this, what we call ward administrators. These are the people at the local level and some representative of the national government in terms of administration to be part of the teams in the workshop who are identifying the gaps and using the tool to address. So this involvement of because these are the people who represent the authorities on at the lowest level. So we have involved them, and I think that has been used in Kenya. It has worked. So yes, and I think there's another question. I don't know if that's sufficient, but there's another question talking about protracted, prolonged displacement. I've seen that one. So I think I can take that also. I think for our case in Kenya, the tool, we didn't just use it as a one-time solution with what is like to identify the gaps we have in terms of the displacement as a whole. Then subsequent activity, which was supported by IOM, was in this scenario to do camp coordination, camp management, evacuation support programs, which now specifically address issue of prolonged displacement or protracted displacement and how to handle it, because it comes with various. So these are diagnostic tool for us. It identifies the gaps we have, and then prescription of each problem that we feel is priority for us as a local government. Depending on each local government, also the context matters. So it's not one-time solution. It just gives you the scenarios and the gaps we have, and then it's you now to prioritize and bring the necessary solutions that is applicable to your local context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Najib, for that response. We also have a question in the Q&A that asks about how this tool adds value to local government and avoids duplication with the work of the local government. Thought that could be an interesting question as well for Lorenzo, if you'd like to take that question, and also how communities and their indigenous knowledge can be part of the implementation of the tool to make it more participatory.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the question on the government perhaps is best addressed to Najib as well. But very quickly on the communities, yeah, I think there are two elements. First of all, make sure that communities participate in the assessment, make sure that these leaders are involved in actually discussing the issue, and then make sure that in the follow-up implementation, there are community leaders and representatives of civil societies that are also leading or participating in relevant priority measures that are actually implemented. Again, in this follow-up on shelter and evacuation and camp management that Najib was mentioning that's happening in Kenya, representatives from the civil societies are involved as part of the people that are actually trained as leaders locally to manage displacement. Elsewhere in Kenya, we're now discussing options to follow up one of these assessments by setting up a group of representatives of displaced persons in different displacement sites so that these people can lead on disaster risk reduction in displacement sites. And this links perhaps also to the issue of protracted displacement that was mentioned also in the chat by Björn. This is not a tool to plan for solutions to disaster displacement, but it's a tool to integrate displacement into disaster risk reduction planning. And that means if there are potential disasters that might affect people that are already displaced, that is something that this tool can help identify, and how we make sure that displaced persons, people that are already displaced, that are in situations of protracted displacement, can be better protected by from future disasters by different types of measures. So perhaps if that's okay for you, Marta, I'll deflect that question on the role of these for governments to Najib, but let me know. Over.
Absolutely. Please, Najib, we would love to hear your complementing response.
Yeah, I think, Lorenzo, you have alluded very well. For us, we haven't seen that as a duplication of efforts. Rather, it has cured that. Maybe it has been, in a way, hindsight. It wasn't meant to do that, but it has cured in a way, bringing stakeholders together. But the government, from where I see it, you are supposed to do these activities with or this scorecard. So scorecard just come a long way as a tool to help you identify the gaps, particularly for displacement, so that at least you can make and prioritize informed interventions as part of the mandate you have to serve the people. So in the context of Kenya so far, the reactions we are receiving from the counties themselves in reviewing their laws or setting up necessary fund and all that, this has been triggered coming from this in a good way, rather than duplicating it, it's complementing. And again, it's redirecting your effort to an impactful intervention, because now you have like assessed yourself, you have looked inward and seen, okay, this is the gap I had. Maybe you didn't see it that way in the first place. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Najib, for that interesting response. We also have a question that could suit Dasha to respond on how the tool can help in fundraising, if there are any examples of this.
Right. Thank you so much for this very interesting question as well. So again, not specifically from the disaster displacement addendum, but from the other scorecards that we have been using, and this is exactly the same model, so the disaster displacement one can be used in the same way. But we've had cases where cities or local governments have applied the scorecard, which helped them to identify certain gaps and come up with a very practical action plan with specific objectives, activities that they would like to implement, and they assigned a specific budget to each activity as well as a timeline. So in a way, they were able to develop a rough project proposal based on the results of the scorecard application. And once you have this kind of proposal, you can go ahead and reach out to donors that can support specific actions, whether it's on disaster risk reduction, climate action, disaster displacement. So this is a little bit of research that would need to be done by the government and local stakeholders side to see what are the relevant donors that can be reached out to. There are also multiple resources available. For example, we have the Making Cities Resilient 2030 platform for local governments, which helps to connect governments with service providers who can provide information on available funding sources, channels. So this is one example of how this can be done. In Asia Pacific, we've had a few cities that have advanced in this process. I have my colleague from Asia Pacific here in the chat, and I think she can also maybe share a few resources in the chat in response to this question. So hopefully this helps to address this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dasha. I see we are approaching the end of the Q&A session, but perhaps we have time for a couple of final questions. One question is around if there are any studies or programs envisaged to implement the scorecard specifically in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Perhaps Dasha or Lorenzo, you'd like to answer that as well. In addition, for Najib, if you'd like to summarize what you see are the key best practices in the implementation of the scorecard that you would like to forward to other participants based on your experience. So to start with the question on the potential plans for implementation in the DRC.
Sorry, Marta, I think we have only time for one last question.
Maybe very quickly, I could suggest that anyone who's interested in using the scorecard, we shared an email that you can contact. Please do reach out to us and we will examine these requests individually, based also on the different projects and programs that are going on and being implemented by the different agencies in the region. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I will hand over to Carla.
Thank you, Marta. It's great to see that there's a lot of interest and many questions actually, and we're sorry if we were not able to address all of your questions right now. I'm also conscious of people's time, so I don't want to go beyond our schedule, but I think it was a great suggestion from Daria that if you have any additional questions or queries, please reach out to the email that was shared. Maybe we can also put it again in the chat. So we can pick up the discussion afterwards. I would like to thank all of you for your very active participation. Thank you specifically for Najib for sharing his experience. It has added great value to the discussion, so we really appreciate it. Of course, also to all the other speakers that were here with us, and to you, the participants. I hope this was useful to you, and we're looking forward to more collaboration and engagement in the future. Thank you, and goodbye.